6 years ago, I totaled my car and needed a replacement. I worked in an area of the country that received lots of snow every year, so I needed four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and I needed something quickly. I found a used all-wheel drive SUV at the biggest dealership in the area. They had a great reputation, but with my skeptical nature, I had worries about possible hidden pitfalls. I called a mechanic friend to get some expert advice, but he was out of town for the week. I had the right idea, but I really should have waited. But the price was right, and I was in too much of a hurry. Well, the SUV's problems surfaced shortly after I bought it. One issue was a continual check engine light. The second was a strange clunking in the transmission. Both were disturbing and persistent. Several returns to the dealership got me lots of assurances, but no permanent resolution. After many failed attempts to resolve the issues, they finally said they'd have to charge me for further diagnostics and repairs to fix the problems, and they had stuck me with the problems. It was a hard lesson that due diligence on my part beforehand could have prevented post-purchase headaches.
Okay, let's transition this line of thinking to you and your company. If you're like many companies in the energy world, you're busy evaluating and acquiring generation assets. It's an exciting endeavor that is potentially troublesome. Recently, an executive from one well-known energy firm told me it is not uncommon for companies to group assets into a bundle for transfer to another entity. And many of those assets are great and look great on paper, but occasionally the selling company will include a little lemon in the package, hoping the attraction of the more appealing assets will distract you from the lemon. A lemon in the energy industry is like a lemon in the automobile industry, but the order of magnitude is way different in terms of potential financial and reputational risk. Automobiles represent thousands of dollars, whereas individual power generating stations represents tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. We're going to lose sleep over the purchase of generating assets if time has not been put into identifying their latent risk. All sorts of potential problems could be hidden within a purchased generation asset bundle. We know of one asset transfer, for example, where the purchasing company learned after obtaining the asset that the original owner had not even registered the asset with NERC, much less implemented an internal compliance program. We heard about another asset that self-reported an item and ultimately received a civil penalty on a self-report. You see, the previous owner had self-reported the same issue, but did not conduct any corrective action. The new owner, through lack of due diligence, was unaware that their self-report was a repeat condition because of their lack of due diligence. You should be asking what kind of regulatory risk might be hidden in a purchased asset generation bundle. Well, you can kind of start with the internal compliance program. Do they have one or do they not? Maybe they have one, but no one's really been following it. Maybe they have one, but it's been inconsistent management of the actions associated with ensuring documentation for compliance with all the standards has been kept. So they've been doing some things, but they didn't really document it very well. Or perhaps lots of actions are being taken, but there are repetitive actions that have been missed. We might find that evidence packages are weak or missing, or there are new and updated standards which they have not developed plans to achieve documented compliance. The potential vulnerabilities are endless and need to be looked at in detail.
So, if I'm considering the purchase of some generating assets, I need to be wholly committed to a regulatory due diligence review and follow these 4 steps. First, perform a NERC internal assessment of the entire NERC regulatory compliance program. Second, conduct a site visit and inspection. Third, review all of the site-related legal documents. And fourth, speak to any of the previous owners before talking to the current owners.
So for step 1, where we perform a NERC internal assessment of the entire NERC regulatory compliance program, we need to understand that a NERC internal assessment is the most critical evaluation to perform. how the site's current NERC regulatory compliance program holds up against the NERC standards really shows you the state of the program and where you might have regulatory vulnerabilities. The NERC internal assessment should be performed by a team having thorough knowledge of NERC standards implementation. The team should include members of the purchasing company and 1 or 2 outside consultants whose ongoing business is NERC regulatory compliance. Your NERC internal assessment team must have experience with programs that align with industry best practices. The NERC standards are regularly updated, and new standards are added periodically. The first step to a successful NERC assessment is confirming the applicability of each standard to the site's NERC registration. Now, having a compliant program requires a lot of time, attention, and effort. For instance, you're required to have and maintain evidence packages that achieve a level of completeness that meets the NERC standards. They must contain the correct information, be substantial enough to accurately demonstrate compliance with the standards, and be in an environment where they are readily retrievable and are updated when necessary. Your team should have diverse members that includes analyzers and doers. You need people who are detail-oriented, critical thinkers to review documents and the physical plant. Now, here are a few of the critical questions an effective due diligence team asks during a detailed NERC internal assessment. What did the site's policies and procedures look like? Have they been kept up to date based on the latest, new, or updated standards? Are they thorough or are they superficial? Has field testing been conducted appropriately? And has that testing been adequately documented? Has the documentation been uploaded to evidence files? Do field components or settings, such as protective relay settings, meet the requirements of the standards? And have there been appropriate and complete security actions taken to meet the SIP standards? Your team also needs at least one member who has a record of effective program implementation, because this is the person who gets results. They can recognize a deficient program when they see it. Remember, the ultimate vulnerability is $2 million per day in potential NERC enforcement fines. NERC has been known to be more forbearing with a detailed program that just missed 1 or 2 critical actions, but a facility that has actively neglected NERC compliance will be subject to more substantial enforcement consequences. A completed NERC internal assessment yields a list of recommended actions to close the gaps. Those actions provide the basis for a cost estimate to implement the gap closing activities.
Number 2, we want to conduct a site visit and inspection. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, a close corollary is there's no substitute for being there. A site visit by your team, preferably during plant operation, is extremely valuable and necessary for due diligence. When your team visits the site, you can see what actions are in place to protect the security of the facility. You can see if vegetation clearing has been maintained. Overgrown vegetation can be a huge cost to correct. A site visit lets the team view firsthand the physical condition of important equipment such as critical components for cybersecurity, the condition of critical equipment and protection relays throughout the plant, the general materiel condition of the site. A physically run-down site might indicate neglect with respect to NERC regulatory compliance, and a comparison of the site equipment list to the physical plant. Your gap analysis and site visits should be closely coordinated. Before visiting, you should request from the site copies of policies and procedures, evidence packages for the most critical NERC standards, and previous audit results, and its last 5 self-reports. The quality or lack of these documents will be very telling. Ensure everyone on the team needs to have time to review and discuss the documents together. Make assignments for individual follow-up actions. Following the document review, conduct the site visit. That way, personnel interviews and additional document reviews can be performed during the visit to confirm or dispute any initial team conclusions.
Review all of the site-related legal documents. Someone on your team should have abundant experience reviewing legal documents related to site ownership and registration. All critical documents that could have bearing on the site's regulatory standing should be reviewed carefully. Many times, promises were made during original plant construction and licensing that became millstones around the necks of the current owners and operators. There could be conditions in these documents that impact your regulatory compliance program. These could be maintenance requirements for equipment owned by others. You even might learn something that is motivating the current owners to transfer the asset to some unsuspecting company. Identify the potentials in these documents. Perform an in-depth investigation to detect if there are any current and relevant issues. List these issues, their potential impact, and the projected cost and effort to remedy them. All of this should be included in the gap analysis report.
Speak to any previous owners of the site before talking to the current owners. Talking to a previous owner of a generating asset is like speaking to a former employer of a prospective employee. You might not want to believe everything they say completely, but listen intently and ask a lot of questions. They might expose deal-killing vulnerabilities at a particular site or exaggerate minor inconveniences. Perhaps they'll reveal some issues that you'll have to deal with and overcome on an otherwise valuable asset. Keep in mind people might be negatively biased or influenced by past experience. So be appropriately skeptical until you get some confirmation. Asking for input from outside, knowledgeable personnel is always a good idea. The goal is to assure yourself that you have asked and gotten answers to the hard questions. In the end, it is always best to speak to harsh critics to ensure you have addressed known issues.
Remember, this is all about lemon detection. Effective due diligence can be conducted in 2 to 3 weeks with a capable team of 3 people who look at both details and processes. The effort should include a site visit and a thorough review of legal documents. It will have a modest price tag, but potentially it saves the acquiring company many headaches and extensive costs remedying problems in the future that weren't identified before acquisition. The saying, "an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure," is never truer than when it comes to generating assets connected to the bulk electric system and subject to NERC regulatory standards. You need to know if the present owner's lack of NERC regulatory adherence could cause you as the new owner a substantial fine in the future. Prudence demands identifying risks before making any commitment. Be wise. Don't skimp. Conduct your due diligence before asset acquisition. We've been doing this for years, supporting hundreds of power industry clients. Trust us. It's worth every penny. We hope this presentation has helped provide some insight on how due diligence can help reduce your regulatory risk. Be sure to comment below if you have questions and stop by our electronic page to talk with us at Certrec. We have experience with due diligence. We've been doing this for more than 10 years. This is Chip Perkins with Certrec. Thank you for joining us.